Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming this evening. Welcome to our permaculture campfire event. Really good to see so many. I'm going to ask if everyone doesn't mind just popping themselves on mute. There will be plenty of time for questions and discussions throughout the session this evening. But yeah, if you want to put any comments in the chat, feel free to do that. And then when we open up to Q&A, we'll invite people to unmute themselves and to ask their questions as well. So yes, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Katie. I work at the Permaculture Association. And my colleagues, Rachel and Andy, are both here this evening as well. Some little tech backup support. And we are really, really excited, delighted to have Nicola Peel here with us this evening to talk about biomimicry. If you haven't heard of it before, you're in for a real treat. I caught some of Nicola's talk at the Festival of Permaculture this year, and I was just completely wowed and inspired. So we really wanted to share this more widely with everyone here. So just a quick explanation of the order this evening. So we're going to hear from Nicola. She's going to take us through her presentation. But then we're going to have time for questions and a discussion. And then once we're done with that, we'll have a little bit of time at the end. If there are any Permaculture Association members who want to stay on and ask us any questions about their membership or the work that we do, we'll be sticking around at the end to answer any questions. So I will just introduce Nicola. So for those of you that don't know Nicola, she is an award-winning environmentalist and solutionist who speaks passionately about the lessons she had learned from her 20 years working in the Ecuadorian Amazon and her deep connection with nature, to the natural world. Combining inspiring stories and practical solution, Nicola provides a vision of how we can live in harmony with nature. So with that, I will pass over to Nicola.
Hello, everybody. So nice to see all these faces and not. I always, do say to people, during presentations, it's always good to turn your video off because, hey, all the video does take up extra bandwidth. So it's nice to see all the faces to start with, and then say, hey, turn your videos off whilst we're doing the presentation and then turn them all back on afterwards so we can do that little tiny bit that's yeah, maybe one of you can stay on so I'm not just talking to but yeah, great. It's like all these little tiny things that make the difference, isn't it? So I'm just going to share my screen with you and so as you can see, we're going to be talking about nature's solutions. So I really want to dedicate this evening's presentation to dear Tim Harland, who's a dear friend, and I know many of you had that great relationship with Tim. And it felt like just a few weeks ago we were all together and talking so often about permaculture, which is that grassroots real solution. And that's my job title. I'm a solutionist. And so I did my permaculture design course 20 years ago with Patrick Whitefield, and now I've although I use permaculture in my kind of day-to-day life, my focus has also been on the really big picture, that kind of think globally and act locally. And those that may have heard me give other presentations, not specifically on biomimicry, will know more about the rest of my work. So always I start by honouring the indigenous people that I have spent over 20 years working alongside in the Ecuadorian Amazon. The wisdom, how to really live resiliently is what we learn from them. This time that I have spent immersed in deep nature, and sadly I don't get enough time to just be there with the trees because I've been really focused on solutions to the nightmare of the oil industry. So some of the work that I did was to build a few hundred rainwater systems using charcoal and sand for the people that are drinking contaminated water. Bring together a team of scientists to work on mycoremediation, the use of fungi to clean up oil spills. And now I have been teaching agroforestry to prevent tropical deforestation. So that's just like a little bit of my background and what I've been doing in my day job kind of thing. But also I have this great passion for biomimicry. So often when I'm, speaking at a school or college, and I'll say, well, hey, so let's just start with what is nature? And I'll show this picture and I'll ask the question and they'll say, well, it's the green bit, it's the forest. And sadly, we're still in that world where we think the city and that humans are somehow different from the natural world. So kind of explaining that, we're all just another species on this planet. We're not quite as important as the earthworms, but we're just another species that's just trying to exist. We're all doing the same thing. We are creating homes, we're feeding young, and just trying to keep warm and fed in whatever way that is. And when we look at, the typical houses that most people live in, made out of cement, which comes from these ancient seabeds, this calcium carbonate. But the way that we build is so intensive in comparison to how the rest of the natural world builds. So the human design, we do a lot of mining. We heat treat to make cement. I mean, you're talking at 1,400 degrees centigrade. This takes a lot of power, which is why it can be up to 6% of greenhouse gases every year comes from cement. Not only do you blow it out of the ground, you have to then package it and ship it. Now, this is the way that humans are currently designing. But if we look at nature doing the same, using the same building blocks, this coral reef is made out of the same calcium carbonate, withdrawing CO2 out of the atmosphere. But it creates its habitat there on site. There's no waste, and it is a process that has been around for a long time. It works. So how can we actually learn? Is it possible to just learn from the coral and build on site? So biomimicry is a lot of words just to kind of put them all out there. Biomimicry, biomimetics, bio-inspired. This is where sustainability is the objective. It's learning from the natural world. But we also can get confused with biomorphism, which looks like nature, but it's not necessarily sustainable. It could be like, slippers that look like, a bear's foot or something. Then there's bioutilization, which can be sustainable or it can be over-harvesting, and bio-assisted, which can be natural breeding or it can be GMO. So, but what we know is bio is natural and mimicry is copying it. So it's copying nature. Could I just ask everyone to just put their self on mute, if you don't mind, those that have just arrived, that would be great. So the best definition is Janine Benyus, really the queen of biomimicry. And this was her book that put biomimicry, out there in the world. And when people are asked, what is the definition? She says it's the conscious emulation of life's genius. It's a survival strategy for the human race, a path to a sustainable future. The more our world functions like the natural world, the more likely we are to endure on this home that is ours, but not ours alone. So the most famous biomimetic example is Velcro. From studying burdock, the burrs and how they stick to your clothes. It was a Swiss scientist that looked at it under the microscope and saw how it created these little tiny hooks. And that was how Velcro, was made. And although people talk about this as biomimicry, and it is partially, but, as we know, it's made out of petrochemicals, which then, doesn't just go back into the natural cycle. Well, it does, but after hundreds and hundreds of years. That's not how a burr works, how quickly that goes back into the natural cycle. So we're partway there. We've learned the step of let's learn from nature, but also how can we make things using totally biodegradable natural resources, which are not going to stay around for millennia. So the human design, we are heating it, beating it, treating it, using really high temperatures, high pressure, lot of toxic chemicals. Look around the world that we live, and most things come from mining. So it's more kind of familiar coming into kind of like more kind of permaculture talk, and what are the biomimicry design life's principles? So in the middle there, you've got that life creates conditions conducive to life. And around the side of the lens, adapt to changing conditions, be locally attuned and responsive, use life-friendly chemistry, be resource efficient, integrate development with growth, and evolve to survive. So there are, what we're quite familiar with, how can we learn these key areas and be able to mimic and replicate them? So biomimicry really is broken down into 3 areas: form, process, and ecosystem. So form, you look at the shape, you look at the texture, the surface. A classic biomimetic example also is the bullet train in Japan. This iconic super fast train with this really elongated nose. Before it had a very elongated nose, the bullet train was going really fast, but every time it came out of a tunnel, it made a sonic boom because it was going from one density to another. And one of the engineers was also a bird watcher, and he noticed how a kingfisher can dive from the air into the water and hardly create a ripple. So they thought, well, if they changed the nose of the train, then it would be able to come out without the sonic boom, which was what happened. So the neighbors were happy, the noise was solved, but also it went much faster, it was much more efficient, and it saved them money. So it became kind of like a win-win. So it's like looking at the form of something to solve some of the challenges that we've got. Mussels, limpets, you try and get one off of a rock. When we look at the process, how do they do it? What is this glue? Most glues that humans use are petrochemical based. So you wouldn't want to drink most of the glues, you wouldn't want to put them in water. So if we look at the protein structure of this sticky stuff that the mussels are creating and learn from them and mimic that to create a natural substance, which is a super strong adhesive, we can move away from all these chemical glues. Then when we look at ecosystem, the big picture, how does nature operate in a functioning ecosystem? So much talk about, the mycelial underground network, how everything is connected beneath the ground. But there are many different systems, and it's really kind of like looking at that big picture way of how we can learn to connect like the natural world does. So zoning in a bit more to give some case studies. So looking at form, sharks are so evolved, they say they can't evolve anymore. Nothing sticks to them. If you look at many ocean dwelling creatures, so they get also barnacles and all sorts of things stick to them, but nothing can stick to a shark. So these dentricles, these platelets that they have, their scales, the shape of them means that nothing can actually adhere. So this company, Sharklet Technologies, looked at this shape and they mimicked it and they created a new material. So, where could that actually come into, human use? So right now, if we look at hospitals or the catering industry or anywhere where they constantly spray with bleach and antibacterials and all these chemicals to keep surfaces clean, how about if we just changed the surface so that bacteria and viruses just didn't have anywhere to hold on to? So totally shifting the way we look is how we can actually learn from these ancient forms. Process, coming back to the coral. How could we do that? How could we learn to build like coral does? And there are companies which are doing this. Blue Crete is one of them. Capturing CO2 out of the atmosphere, running it through a conversion plant, turning it back into calcium carbonate, and then turning this into a building material. Surely this is a win-win. We've got to get the CO2 out of the atmosphere. We need to have building materials. We can do this. This technology we need to know about. We need to promote it. We need more of it. We need money going into this kind of infrastructure. Systems. I remember years ago being at Findhorn and seeing one of these living machines where all of the toilets, all of the water all came through. These amazing reed bed systems, which totally cleansed the water. In the end, it came through a UV light and you could drink it again. But Zeri systems have also been looking at amazing examples of closed loop. This is a diagram of a coffee business, which would normally just sell coffee and the rest of it would be a waste product. Or a clearer example is of a beer company that, again, it would make beer and everything else would be waste. But if it was to work like nature did and look at all those closed loop systems, well, the spent grains from the beer could be turned into bread or mushrooms, and that when that was spent could be fed to the pigs, and then the pigs create waste which can be turned into compost that can go through an anaerobic digester and make gas. The excess water can go to feed fish. So instead of just selling beer, they could be selling beer and bread and mushrooms and bacon and compost and gas and fish. If you just look at it in a closed loop system, this is actually an amazing business potential as well. So what we're talking about is shifting the way that we look at things. Instead of learning about the natural world, which we've been very good at through our natural history, it's all about what's the Latin name of that plant, and how long does it live for, and what are the uses for us humans. So instead, if we learn from the tree, doesn't matter what its Latin name is, but how does it stand up against gravity? Have you ever seen like a huge tree leaning over like this? Like how it stands up against gravity, how water is moved against gravity up to the top of a redwood tree. We do not still know how this works. They are the ultimate at capturing solar energy and creating rain. There is so much we can learn if we humble ourselves and look to nature and ask, teach me. I want to learn how you do this. So that's the big shift in thinking. So what's known as Murray's law? This law is observed in the vascular and respiratory system of animals, xylem in plants, and the respiratory systems in insects. We see this branching pattern everywhere, in every leaf, in every tree, in the rivers, inside our own lungs and veins, this branching pattern. Why does nature use it so often? So, of course, the reason it uses it is it's the most efficient way to move gas and to move water. What do humans do? Pretty much straight pipes with an L. You don't see that in the natural world. So there's been some amazing studies showing if we change systems over to using the branching pattern, not only does it use a lot less energy to move water around, it uses a lot less materials in the pipes as well. So looking at material design and examples that we can get from biomimicry, Boeing does have its own biomimicry department. Of course, we know the airplanes came from looking at birds, but they didn't do a very good job because obviously they're using loads of fossil fuels. So they have to make them more efficient. And coming back to the sharks again, they have done that. They've covered part of the wings with this new surface to stop the drag. And also, they've been really looking at the real dimensions of wings on birds. Because, one flap of an albatross's wings, it can go a long way. So how can we improve efficiency? Because that is what ultimately we have to learn. So Speedo, they've already used this in their fabric. They have created a swimming costume which mimics the shark skin, and it's been banned in the Olympics. It wouldn't be fair to the countries that are not able to get hold of this swimming costume. If we look at geckos, you know, you say, well, how do they climb up the wall and over the ceiling? And you probably think it's little suction pads, but it's not. When you zoom in on their little suction pads, you see that there's all these tiny, tiny little hairs. And it's actually the hairs which are interacting with the wall. So you say, well, you know, can we create other kind of tapes, which isn't based on petrochemicals, can be, you know, biopolymers, but uses this other technique to be able to grip. Hippos, you know, they wallow in the African sun and they don't get burnt. How do they not get burnt? You know, what do? Cover ourselves in petrochemicals. If we look at the hippo and just see, hey, what is this stuff? You know, a little scraping of like this mucus that they're covered in. And again, it's some kind of protein which protects them naturally from getting burnt in the sun. So all of this kind of comes back to how do we move away from petrochemicals? How does nature and the rest of the world survive without them? And if we want to move away from fossil fuels, there are so many areas that we need to address. Collecting water in the desert. This has become quite a famous little Namib beetle from the Namib desert. There's no rain in the desert. So how does it collect water? Well, what it does is in the morning, it climbs up the sand dune. It collects any fog which is in the atmosphere, and then it bends forward and it has little gutters that go straight into its mouth. So an ingenious design. The shiny black shell with the bumps on it attracts the fog that's in the atmosphere. So they've taken this to say, well, hey, can we build greenhouses in the desert? Learn from the beetle to how to capture fog where there is no rain. They've been doing this. The Sahara Forest Project in Jordan is this massive, they're rolling this out. You know, we know in permaculture the talk about the importance of greening the deserts, you know, creating these green walls, but also using this technology, learning from the beetles, using concentrated solar, you know, the mirrored solar, rather than solar panels. You know, one mirror can, you know, create a fire. So why are we still not using this? It's an incredible amount of power in the middle of a desert, which could easily power desalination plants. And once what do you use all that kind of excess salt? Once it's been desalinated, you turn it into building blocks. The rest of the minerals, including lithium, can be used in all sorts of other areas. So instead of this continual mining, what we're looking at is how we can close a lot of these loops to do what it is that we're looking to do. And, you know, on the left, you can see those greenhouses there, that not just inside is it green, but now outside, all around the greenhouse in the middle of the desert, are they being able to grow food? Another amazing advance in material design is this paint, learning from the lotus. So the lotus leaves, you know, they come up out of the mud, but they always stay clean. And why is that? This hydrophobic leaf, the way that water just kind of purls up and rolls off, and it keeps the leaf clean. So this company, Lotusan, they've developed a paint which does the same. It's a self-cleaning paint. So, you know, how much money and how much chemicals go into this continual need to repaint to keep it clean? If we can just change the structure of the paint so that it's self-cleaning, that would save, you know, a lot of these resources. Energy. Humans are woefully inefficient. This is a great example. I mean, these constant traffic jams that we see everywhere. But, I've seen these amazing leafcutter ants in the Amazon, millions and millions of them working together, carrying their load. I mean, they're not stuck in any traffic jams. We've really got to reassess the whole way that we're moving around. So another great biomimetic example is how could we improve wind power? So if you look to the whale and a whale's fin, this creature has evolved over years to, how do you get this big, bulky, heavy object out of the water up into the air, going again from one density to another? Their fins are not straight. They have this serrated edge to them. So they've shown that if we were to change wind turbine blades or propellers on boats or fans in computers or anything with a moving blade to have a serrated edge, it would be so much more efficient. Solar panels, same thing. Solar panels are terribly inefficient. Who do we learn from? Who are really good solar collectors? Obviously, leaves on the trees and butterflies. Butterflies are amazing at collecting solar energy. And when you look under an electron scanning microscope, they're pretty much all holes. The light can go in there and bounce back out of them. Whereas our panels are these solid, heavy, dense, using, again, loads of resources. They've also shown that a butterfly, it doesn't just hang out in any position. It holds its wings at 17 degrees. And at 17 degrees, that's how it generates heat the quickest to be able to move off. So there's so many areas that by studying them, we can improve, efficiency. LED lights, which, we need LED lights. They're much, as efficient as we can have right now. But for a long time, they could not work out how to make a little tiny light shine. And it was looking to a firefly, this little tiny beetle, and wondering, well, how does this tiny little beetle shine so brightly? And when they looked, they saw that its stomach wasn't round. It had a jagged edge. In permaculture, it's all about the edge. When the LED lights changed the edge and made them serrated, then they shone. So, we're learning from the natural world, and some of it seems so totally crazy and far-fetched. These trees, it's like, okay, we want to replicate a tree, and hey, in the middle of a city, we're going to make something that looks like a tree, and it's going to act a bit like a tree in that it's collecting solar light, it's creating shade, it's enabling to create power, it's pumping up water. Then there's also in Singapore, these amazing trees in Singapore, which are, covered in plants and really purifying the air in Singapore. So it's, it's kind of like morphing between this kind of like eco and this, almost like AI, these trees. But, there's an interesting line here. Architecture, something which we urgently need to improve on. There's a great quote here, Julian Vincent: "In nature, materials are expensive and shape is cheap," which is why nature puts so much energy into the correct design. Because if you get the design right, you don't need to use many resources. So for a long time, architects have been being inspired by the natural world. Crystal Palace, the main person behind the architectural design was a gardener at Kew Gardens. And he had been looking at the giant Amazon water lily and the structure of it and how come it was so strong. Somebody could stand on it. They took this over to Crystal Palace, which wanted to create this massive exhibition center, but it didn't want to have lots of internal pillars. This went on to Stuttgart University, who wanted to make, kind of outdoor spaces which could be taken down and reused, but also without having all these internal pillars. So they looked to a sea urchin, this strong form that doesn't have anything in the middle. And that's how they created, these new designs, also designed to be reused and to use as little as possible in the materials. But this is one of the most amazing examples, which is the Eastgate Centre in Harare, Zimbabwe, which is the largest shopping complex and building. It uses less than 35% of the energy of another building there in Zimbabwe. And they didn't put any air conditioning in it, which saved 3.5 million. So what's going on here? Basically, the termites in the middle of the desert, they have to feed this fungus that lives underground. That's what those ants are doing. They're bringing the leaves to the fungus underground. And the termites need to keep the fungus at exactly 87 degrees. Now, it's really cold in the desert at night, and it's really hot during the day. So how do they keep it at a stable temperature? What they've done is they've created this elaborate venting system. So what the architects have done, they've learned from the termites how to create a natural venting system which doesn't use air conditioning. Now, seeing air conditioning is number one worst thing for climate change because of the HFCs, the hydrofluorocarbons, which are a super planet warming gas. If we're to carry on with the world developing and everybody wanting an aircon unit, and imagine this new massive high-rise block in Africa, every room would have an aircon system. If that's the way we're going to go, we're in even worse problems than we already are. So if we can learn from the natural world of how to create a building that actually doesn't need to have any aircon, it can naturally cool itself. So they say it works like a human lung, which is amazing. The structure itself like naturally breathes in oxygen during the day and releases carbon monoxide at night. So, we have these examples which are so important to be able to show. Next time when you're seeing the gherkin, we've got to stop calling it the gherkin because actually it was designed on the Venus flower basket sponge. The architects wanted to create this cylindrical shape that was strong, again, didn't need to have lots of columns in the middle. And so that's what they learned from. They learned from this marine sponge made of silica can withstand, a lot of pressure and how it could naturally ventilate itself as well. Birds. I'm reckoning around 700 million birds a year fly into glass because they can't see it. But they never fly into a spider's web. And that's because spider's web have this natural UV coating on it. So that's why we can only see it at certain lights. So this company, Ornilux, learning from the spider's web, had put in UV strands or painted on into the glass. We can't see it with our eyes, but birds can. So it stops them being, flying into, all these windows. So this just showing adaptive buildings of the future. A pine cone opens and closes depending on if it's wet or not. I'm going to turn this music. Oh, I can't turn it down any less than that, I think. And so what they've done here, using exactly the same lesson from a pine cone, that when it's wet, it closes to keep the seeds dry. When it's dry, the pine cone will open to release the seeds. So I said, well, in the future, we could have adaptive buildings that don't need any energy to do this, just like a pine cone. It's just the different tensile strengths that could create something to naturally open and close depending on the temperature. Now, this is another really amazing example. This is Interface Floor, and the quote from the owner, Ray Anderson: "We realized that we were part of an industrial system, a take, make, waste, a linear system that's literally digging up the earth and converting it to rubbish. And of course, it can't go on. The earth is finite." This is a carpet manufacturer, and he was saying, we've got to love carbon. We're vilifying carbon. We're all made of carbon. We need a new industrial revolution, and companies like theirs, which makes things like carpet, which is totally not ecological, how can they turn it round? So they contacted Jeanine Benyus and said, look, we want to change our whole business model. She took them out to the forest and was like, okay, let's study the forest floor. No two leaves are the same. And from this idea, they totally changed the way of making carpet. So it was based on carpet tiles where there's this natural entropy. No two leaves are the same. No two carpet tiles must be the same. So if one bit gets, stained or needs replacing, you don't need to replace the whole office carpet. You can just replace one tile. And they worked out that waste elimination activities have diverted 200 million pounds of material from landfill since 1995, resulting in 430 million pounds in costs. So they've made loads of money, but they're doing the right thing. And not only have they worked out a way of, instead of, when the colors are slightly different and it doesn't match with the carpet, you end up having huge amounts of waste. You don't have this problem if you're basing it on a totally different way. But then they were also like, well, how do we stick it? Because also we use petroleum-based glues to stick down the tiles. They looked at the gecko feet, the way that they stick, and they've created these little tabs, these sticky things which can be used, taken off and stuck down. So, this one company, and from this, they've created like these amazing design awards to encourage other companies to look to nature to solve some of their problems. So these buildings are already out there in the world. You've got this Bosco Verticale, which is one of the first main buildings covered in plants. Also in Milan, there's this building which absorbs smog. Then down the bottom left is the Bullet Building in Seattle, which is the most eco skyrise building. And then we've got, our traditional houses made out of local resources. And, we've got to be able to learn from all of these different systems. So in Manchester and Salford, they've now got Europe's largest green wall, and it's the second biggest in the whole world. 12-story building, 350,000 plants, and integrated in it are bird boxes and bug boxes. And, this is what we know the cities need to look like of the future. This is a concept, the Mobius project, which are looking at how within cities can you grow food and deal with waste and have a restaurant all at the same time. So these kind of concepts of the future of architecture, we could be building these whole different systems which kind of integrate something, which can be, bringing together all of that food production and a cafe and a waste system. And so, it's there, it's starting to be spoken about. But when I show pictures like this to students and I say to them, well, hey, this is, an idea of Paris 2050. And, why is it so green? And, well, it's much better for you, it's for your mental health. Of course, it is much better for your mental health. We know that, being in around greenery. And it cleans the air and it's more biodiversity and, all the benefits of more oxygen and carbon sequestration. But one of the real practical reasons as well is it keeps the buildings cool in the summer, and it also keeps them warmer in the winter. So the importance of having buildings that are integrating this greenery has so many benefits, and we urgently need to start visioning the change that we need to have in our cities. Fashion, another big topic. So here we go, looking at these beautiful dragonflies and butterflies and feathers on birds, and they're not dyed. So what is it? How does the natural world make all these beautiful colors, where we are using hundreds of thousands of tons of textile dyes? I mean, they used to say in China, you could tell next season's fashion color by the color of the rivers. If the rivers are running red or orange, then that's the next season's fashion. Still, so many rivers are running with these chemical dyes. most clothes today. In fact, it's really difficult to find natural dyes. So there's two ways of looking at things. Do we, we can't possibly grow the amount of natural dyes that would be needed for the world. So how are we going to move away from this huge industry, which is creating so much contamination? Do we need to just totally rethink and look at nature and go, well, hey, how are you creating all these beautiful colors? And it's structural color. It's not dyed. When you look at a flower or a butterfly or a beetle or under a microscope, under an electron scanning microscope, and we can start to see how amazing the natural world is. It's all to do with the way that light bounces off. That's what changes the color. We can think of a peacock's feather and we think it's blue, but actually really it's brown, the same as these beautiful morpho butterflies. And over the years, I've always seen them in the Amazon, and I've thought, oh, I would really love a turquoise, a jacket that's waterproof. But what would it be made out of? It would be made out of petroleum. It would be dyed using petrochemical colors. So how is nature doing this? So that's where there's a real movement to studying structural color and how by changing surface, we can actually just change the color spectrum. But the most used color in the world is white, and it comes from titanium, which is extremely toxic to mine. The world is full of this stuff, from the painting of the zebra crossings to makeup to all sorts of stuff is made out of titanium. So we have to move away from this toxic mining. And there is this beetle, which is incredibly white. And they've learned from the structure of it, of how in the future we can use biopolymers made out of a natural cellulose from plants to actually create a natural white. So when we're looking at the need to change fashion, what is sustainable fashion? I mean, there's no such thing really. Even organic cotton, it needs so much water. Non-organic cotton needs so much pesticide because, of course, every little insect wants to live in a cozy little cotton ball. So then they look to silk or spiders' webs and say, well, hey, look at this beautiful golden orb spider. What are we going to do? Are we going to create, warehouses full of millions of spiders to make these beautiful golden natural gowns? Or can we just ask the spider, hey, out of dead flies and water, how do you make the most amazing, strongest fiber known to man? Can we just learn from the spiders how they do it? Find out what the protein molecules are, find a method of fermentation, and be able to create it ourselves. And we have. And Stella McCartney has just been working with this, the first spider silk, vegan spider silk made by humans, which is 5 times stronger than steel, 3 times stronger than Kevlar, and can withstand temperatures up to 300 degrees. I mean, this is game changing. So is the future of fashion not that we are growing loads of cotton or the rest of our clothes, which mainly are nylon or synthetics, which again, all come from petroleum? So as we phase out fossil fuels, what are clothes of the future going to be made out of? But we also have these other amazing natural vegan leathers. This is kombucha. I mean, most people only think of kombucha as drinking it, but actually whatever size you put it, it will just grow. And so there's been some amazing advances in creating these new types of leathers out of mushrooms or out of other kinds of agricultural waste. This is pineapple fabric. Again, it comes out really like leather. So using waste and turning it into something else, which is the whole question. Is there such a thing as waste? And it's just stuff in the wrong place. We've got to move away from talking about rubbish and waste into it's a resource. And how can we change the way that we look at it? So we know this is what we're faced with. Vast amounts of food waste, electronic waste, plastic, rubbish, not even just, the rivers and the ocean. And, we've trashed also the atmosphere. We have so many satellites around our planet now. We have so much space junk. So it's all about the way of our thinking as well. We just buy it, we mine it, we make it, and we dump it. We just waste it. So the shift that we need to see what could the future possibly look like if we didn't just keep dumping stuff. And even if it's something green, like electric cars or solar panels or wind turbines, they all are from mining. They all have a negative environmental impact, which we cannot deny. And it's that same, mine it, make it, dump it. These new pits are coming from that very waste. So until we actually change the way that we mine and the way that we produce, all of these so-called green materials have massive, massive negative impacts. So going back to our physics lessons, there are 118 elements in the periodic table. There they all are. Nature only uses 28 of them. That's from like the hardest power shells through to the most gelatinous mushrooms. You know, all we see in the natural world actually only uses 28 elements. But humans have managed to pretty much use the majority of them. And most of them are left deep down below the ground. But in our wisdom of mining them up and turning them into all these wonderful things, now we don't know how to deal with them. So the classic example of human packaging and an example of nature's packaging, I mean, it even changes color to tell you when it's ready. The packaging of our brains, you know, nature has many, many different kinds of packaging. And so there is a lot that we can learn from. We are moving in the right direction. Coming to using mushrooms, mycelium packaging, which acts like that awful polystyrene, which needs to be banned yesterday, but can act in that same way. You can use the mushrooms, you can grow them to the form and to the size that you want to create this new packaging, making all packaging so it is compostable, moving on to refilling, not recycling. You know, recycling is a cop-out. It perpetuates consumerism. Or moving on to a whole different kind of like look of packaging. This is water in a ball, which is made from algae. It's a company called Nopla, No Plastic, and they were giving them out at the London Marathon. So yeah, I mean, instead of having a plastic bottle, you just eat the packaging. So edible packaging is really starting to come through as well for things like yogurts and ice creams and water. And so we just don't have to, we move away from this concept of recycling. But also looking at, with discovering that the greater wax moth, which destroys beehives, also eats polyethylene. So I think, well, okay, you know, we've got to deal with it. We know that some mushrooms can break down plastic, some bacteria, and now we're finding that these caterpillars also can break it down. But as well as breaking it down, we basically have to just totally change it. As again, we get off of petroleum-based stuff. What are we going to move on to? There's this bee, which comes from Australia, but it's been being studied by Humble Bee in New Zealand. And this amazing bee creates this kind of plasticky looking substance to protect its offspring. And when you look at this material, this spectrograph of this nesting material that this bee creates, to start with, they thought, oh, it's just waterproof. But it's not only just waterproof, it's also can resist like flame retardant, chemicals. And so there's this kind of like miracle substance that this little bee is creating. And if we can learn from the bee, hey, what is this amazing material that you've created? One of the other most toxic things that we create is flame retardant. So all of the things that we see around us that has flame retardancy in, if we can find how to make it in a natural way, it's another one of these huge game changers, thanks to learning from the natural world. So although we have this world full of petrochemical rubbish, I mean, we're talking about 300 million tons of plastic where 3% is currently recycled, you know, it's not working. Then we look at nature's rubbish, which just doesn't exist. You know, those beautiful, you know, bluebells, they come and then they go back into the, you know, the cycle of soil. The shell will just break down and turn back into sand. How can we learn to really close our loop so we move away from this human nightmare that we've created with all of our rubbish? So the 9 basic principles of biomimicry. Nature runs on sunlight. It uses only the energy it needs, fits form to function, recycles everything, rewards cooperation, banks on diversity, demands local expertise, curbs excesses from within, and taps the power of limits. This is what we really need to understand and start bringing into all areas. So whenever you're out and about, start looking for patterns and asking why. You know, why do you use that pattern? You know, what is this all about? The beauty of patterns in the natural world. A great example is the sunflower. Because why does it have this beautiful pattern? Yes, because nature loves beauty, the intrinsic beauty and the intrinsic value, but it's super practical. And it's actually the most efficient way to get the largest number of seeds in a circle is using that pattern. So again, it comes down to efficiency. There's the Biomimicry Global Design Challenge. Every year, the Ray Anderson Foundation, the guy with the carpets, there's $100,000 per year is put into the Biomimicry Global Design Challenge, where university students from all around the world create teams to come up with nature-based inspired ideas. So I've got a couple of them here for you.
Team Hexagrow has members from Italy, Colombia, and Costa Rica. Traditional farming methods are energy intensive and emit a large amount of carbon dioxide. Unsustainable agricultural practices can consume massive amounts of water, pollute the land and adjacent waterways, and can lead to habitat conversion and loss. Team Hexagrow looked to nature to find examples of how organisms reduce space, conserve energy, and increase efficiency. They found that hexagons, as found in bees' honeycombs, are the ideal shape for this purpose. The hexagon is also found in snowflake patterns, insect eyes, viruses, flowers, and more. Soil-free agricultural methods represent an opportunity to grow more food in smaller spaces more quickly, with less water and without using pesticides. Team Hexagrow has created a groundless growing system that gives people the opportunity to grow healthy food with a smaller footprint. Hexagrow is made of recyclable, biodegradable materials and has a unique hexagonal shape. It's 4 times more efficient than traditional farming techniques and has an automatic irrigation system that adapts to the time of day and season. A digital application will be developed in order to connect the system to smartphones, another way to make it easier for anyone, anywhere to grow healthy food.
So, you know, these are what some of these youth are coming up with. And there's like one short other one which entered in for the challenge. Actually, I'll jump this first.
Team Ceres is from the Regional Center for Innovation in Fruits and Vegetables based at the Pontifical Catholic University of Valparaiso in Chile. Soil is where food begins. The food production system has become more industrial and mechanized, which has resulted in increasingly degraded agricultural soils. The best way to improve the physical and chemical condition of our soil is by using natural systems to restore it. Team Sarah's inspiration came from the Ureta, which are flowering plants that live in harsh environments. Ureta and plants like them provide natural shelters that increase the biodiversity and survival of seedlings around them. This ecological nurse effect process is crucial for the community's long-term resilience. The team's innovation, inspired by the Ureta plant, is called BioNurse. Just as nurse plants like the Ureta help other species survive extreme conditions, the BioNurse allows seeds to grow in harsh environments. Made of natural fibers that biodegrade after one season, the BioNurse is designed to protect plants from wind and direct UV radiation, absorb and direct water to their roots, regulate temperature and humidity, and provide nutrients to the plant. This allows physical and chemical restoration of the soil through a dynamic biological system that encourages seed roots to grow, generating spaces for life.
So alongside with the Biomimicry Institute, there's also this amazing website called Ask Nature. So for instance, say I wonder how nature would filter water. If you ask that question, it would be, well, look to the kidneys or look to fish's gills or look to different kinds of membranes to see how does nature actually filter water. So it's totally different from the way that we would normally think. So just finishing up with another one of Janine's quotes. Nature by necessity has already solved many of the problems we are grappling with. Animals, plants, and microbes are the consummate engineers. They have found what works, what is appropriate, and most important, what lasts here on Earth. So that gives you a bit of a quick whistle-stop tour of biomimicry and how we can start looking differently. We have to humble ourselves to realize that we know so little about the magical world, and only now, because of technical advancements using these electron scanning microscopes, can we glimpse into the structures of the natural world and start to learn. Because ultimately we have just got to use less resources. We've got to stop the mining, we've got to stop the fossil fuels. So we have to find what the solutions are and who best to learn from than the natural world. So you can find out more about me and my work on my website. And also I do a once a month podcast for my Patreon supporters, where I interview interesting people that are working on solutions. And in fact, I just interviewed Morag Gamble for my next one. So that's a little bit you can find out about my work and how to follow what I'm doing. So I will stop sharing my screen, and I haven't had time to have a look at any of the chat, and we can see if there's any questions out there or discussion points. So we can all turn our cameras on again so we can see each other.
Thank you, Nicola. That was, as somebody has said, that was absolutely awesome. It was just absolutely fascinating and really inspiring and encouraging as well to see that there are so many, well, there's some innovation out there, and there's funding and support behind that innovation as well. So that was amazing. I mean, I would invite, if anyone has a question, I would invite you to turn your screen back on and either put your hand up or and unmute yourself and just feel free to ask away. I've just realized my computer's about to run out of battery, so I'm going to sort that out.
I'm just having a little look through the questions at the moment. We've got overwhelm, new information.
I'll ask a question,
Hey,
Nicola.
go for it, Andy.
So first of all, thank you. That was really fantastic. So there's so many links there with permaculture, obviously. permaculture are also inspired by nature. So from a biomimicry perspective, can you give us one or two of your kind of top permaculture principles that you think kind of link to what you've been talking about?
No such thing as waste.
Yeah, produce no waste. That's a definite, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you can totally see. I mean, they line up perfectly. But I think the difference is, say, with permaculture, we are looking at it from a very kind of like localized way. Whereas also, you know, it's like how we can keep both. We need to keep the local, we need to keep the global, we need to keep the micro, we need to keep the macro, we need to keep the small, we need to keep the big. We need to keep, you know, opening ourselves up to, you know, we've got a big problem on our hands.
Yeah.
And yes, permaculture is one of those strands of the tapestry. And there are many other strands that we need to pull. So, you know, that can kind of show whatever industry people are in, whether it's a carpet manufacturer or a packaging manufacturer or, you know, making energy or whatever area, we can advance, we can evolve, we can change.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, there are so many overlaps.
Well, it's that link to industry and how it's being taken, biomimicry is being taken on by business, which is really exciting. Is there anything else you could say about how kind of business and biomimicry are developing?
Not fast enough. Yeah, there are absolute examples, and like companies like Boeing and Dyson have a biomimicry department, so that's huge advancements in that. Yes, absolutely, some business know that they kind of have the light bulb moment of, oh, maybe we can learn for free from nature. And so it's starting to make sense for them because they have problems they cannot solve. They are so stuck in the world of petrochemicals. And, you know, actually their whole industry revolves around fossil fuels. What happens when there aren't any? Are we really going to make biopolymers all from food? How are we going to also look to material design of the future? So coming into that kind of like the fashion idea of there are many, many different alternatives to fashion, but also the amount that we would need to grow to have all hemp clothes, flax clothes, you know, all these beautiful natural fibers. Is that actually realistic when the majority of clothes that are worn today are all made out of petrochemicals? So there needs to be both. There absolutely needs to be, you know, natural materials being grown and worn and used, but also, you know, there's really going to have to be, you know, a whole rethink on the world as we're in it at the moment.
That's a great point. Thanks.
I was really interested in the point you made around that kind of like urban design, and something that I've been talking to people about a lot recently is kind of urban permaculture and how that is going to evolve and change in the near future. And I think it was just really nice to see that really visualized in some of your examples, and how it's applied in those urban settings.
Which is why I think we urgently need artists, musicians, poets. We need to be able to visualize what the future of cities is going to look like. Because, you know, it's like, if we can't see the future, we ain't never going to get there. So we've got to be able to see it. And most of the visions that we have of the future are quite apocalyptic. There's not much space. There's certainly, you know, where are the Hollywood films? Where are the imagery about the future that we want? What does it actually look like? So we can see that through permacultural systems. And so creating those visions are so important. So we can see, yeah, that is where we want to get to. And how can we, in a really practical way, start working towards that? And greening the cities is an easy one. You know, I mean, really, at the end of the day, it is one of the easiest things that we can do. I thought I saw a question coming in here. I see more scope for biomimicry in the social zones too. Oh yes, I do sometimes talk about that as other examples in communication. So obviously we've got the mycelium, which I'm sure most people know about, in the way that this underground world is communicating, and how also some trees like walnuts or orchids, they're also hackers. They can hack the system and take what they want through it. So using and learning from ants and bees and their method of communication, the waggle dance with the bees. I mean, this amazing way of them coming back, doing a little dance, and then the rest of them know exactly where the food source is. And what is wild is that computer software programmers have actually been studying these dances to see, this method of communication they have that is simple and really works. So we're seeing it in this kind of like understanding of what can we learn through the way that nature communicates, whether that be the unspoken through pheromones, or whether it is through, there's so many ways of communication. And yeah, that's definitely an area which is also being really looked at. And, that systems way of communication. And that's why I love, obviously the whole kind of myco nerdy bit, since starting the myco remediation project and getting all these scientists down over 15 years ago to the Amazon. And, I was asked to speak this year at the Fungi Festival. God, I did that 15 years ago. And it seems like such a long time ago speaking about mycoremediation. But it's still like it's a new thing that, hey, did you know you can clean up oil spills with mushrooms? It's like, yeah, and we're still not doing it, but we know that it works. But this underground network of mycelium, which, there's so many amazing books out there now, explaining, Merlin Sheldrake's Entangled Lives, and Susan Simard's The Mother Tree, and these books, which are real, groundbreaking in understanding this incredible method of communication, which is like happening all the time beneath our feet. And I'm also the founder of the Southeast Climate Alliance. So in Sussex, Surrey, Kent, and Hampshire, we have an alliance for any social, environmental, or faith-based groups working on climate and ecological solutions. We have over 130 member organizations. The big ones like the wildlife trusts and CPRE and Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth. And then we've got XR next to Eco Cops, and, so we've got eco churches. And so we have this umbrella. And for me, that was a big part of, one stick is easily broken, but a bundle is not. If all of us get together, which is also why it's so important to have associations like this, where we are much stronger when we come together and we communicate together and we share information and we share resources. This whole reinventing the wheel is one of the big problems, that we're all just trying to kind of like do our own thing. So the more we can kind of share that information, the quicker we get. I'm also an ambassador for One Planet, which is this incredible tech, which again is like based on this mycelial way of communicating. It uses what was Purun Desai, who's the founder. He also developed the Sustainable Development Goals and One Planet Living, which is happening in Wales. And now that has been brought into the One Planet technology. At the moment, we're focusing on councils. And it's like, okay, we need to get out of siloed thinking into a joined up way of thinking. So One Planet can really help with businesses doing that. So any of these kind of resources are a way of us all learning and moving forward together. Ryan, I see you put here, Andy. Feel free to jump in, Ryan, and ask it directly. Oh, we were just
okay. I'm just saying we're just saying that people can just jump in and ask a question if they want to. Ryan's question, you've just answered it. David, do you want to come in?
Hi, I'm very new to biomimicry, and it's been an amazing talk, fascinating. I'm just thinking, is there a tension between biomimicry and artificial intelligence, or can it complement each other? Because there's been lots of debates about AI solving lots of problems, machines mimicking the human brain. But is that the antithesis, do you think, of biomimicry, or can they work together?
I think they're going to have to work together. We're not going to stop AI. So, yes, we need AI to learn from the natural world. But hey, you know, let's learn from cancer. Imagine that. Continual growth. So there's major issues with this as well. So like anything, you know, and AI being a big one. In fact, I was just on a panel a couple of weeks ago for the London Design Festival on sacred design. And my panel was followed with AI and design. And it's like, yeah, well, okay, yeah, we have the you know, ancestral, the new AI, not artificial intelligence, ancestral intelligence, which is there, but we've just not been asking the right questions of it. So, you know, yes, absolutely, AI using the natural world as model and mentor, we could learn so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
We've got one more question in the chat. So, are there any patenting barriers to the wider use of nature-inspired shapes, such as the patenting of the I can't say this properly, crenulated edges of the wind turbine blades?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big things, and I think a lot of people into, you know, biomimicry really understand that this information must be shared. You cannot own nature. You cannot own nature's intelligence. And actually, that's why Ask Nature is so important. It is this open resource. So anyone that finds out anything, it gets put onto Ask Nature. Nature's already doing this. You can't patent nature's ideas. And I mean, what amazes me, that we've known about this for a long time, about the wavy edge being more efficient. Why are they still not doing it? No. So it doesn't make sense. No, there's not the patents. I mean, I'm sure there are patents on some things within the biomimetic world, but there's very much this real push for it to be open source, because we've all kind of like know that all these problems out there, there are the solutions. We've just not been, say, finding them and looking for them. But yeah, I think it's a good question. And but yeah, that Ask Nature is a really good kind of antithesis of that, to stop that.
Yeah, that looks like a really, really fascinating website. I'm definitely going to jump on that and have a look at that tomorrow.
And so I've just also been contacted by a cooperative in Northern Ireland to they want to do like a whole youth design challenge, which is like a big piece of work with 6 schools. And so myself and Richard Dawson from Wild Awake are, you know, kind of putting together a potential program for them. So it's great that they're really wanting to go, and they put a lot of money behind this. So there's a few people tendering for it at the moment, but they also want to, as well as looking at the youth design challenge, they want to look at biomimicry in community design as well. So, you know, that will be great, working on that.
Yeah, I mean, the application is just endless. I mean, I was just, when you were talking about the closed loop system, I was just thinking about, you know, using that as a concept for household expenditure, and how you can like look at reusing other elements within your kind of, yeah, your home to help reduce your costs. And it's just, yeah, it's just endless. So one question, any great resources for teaching secondary? I often find students just look at form. I think that's a really, I mean, the application of biomimicry and the discussion of biomimicry is so, it's something I can see which would really resonate with young people. So yeah. It's awesome.
Well, so there's 2 approaches. There's biology to design and design to biology. So the 2 ways of looking, you know, generally are, do you look at something in biology, something in the natural world, see how it functions, and then apply it to a human problem? Or do you turn that round and you look at a human problem and then look at the biology which is already doing that. So there are two different approaches to working in that way. And, you know, it's easier to look at a human design and then say, well, okay, you know, this is our design challenge. And, you know, what in nature is already doing that? And, you know, I mean, those simplistic videos, which the university students came up with, it's like, okay, how in the desert do you create these little nurse environments to shelter other species? You know, so looking at, you know, that's something in nature which is already doing that and actually copying it, which is an easier way than doing it the other way around, which you can do as well. I mean, when I was studying, which is a great thing we can all do, there's no way I can study biomimicry in the UK, sadly. When university students, if I speak at colleges or unis, the kids are like, whoa, this is amazing, I want to study it, where can I go? And I have to say, oh, well, you'll have to go to Arizona State University or Utrecht in the Netherlands, but we don't actually have anywhere in the UK currently. Wild Awake, who I'm working with, Richard Dawson, he has a lot of material for schools. So yeah, there's also through the Biomimicry Institute, there's also a lot of materials for schools as well. But say Richard's done a lot of work in Wild Awake.
Great question, thank you. Anything else? Anyone else would like to jump in with some final questions? I think we've got a couple more minutes.
Oh, someone's saying they'll get onto Ecotricity to propose the new turbine blades. Well, I would love to have that conversation. And I spoke to Dale, Vince, so you can pass this on if you're directly in contact with him, because and this is something good to share with everybody, actually. So we can be promoting the plant-based diet, which, you know, obviously Dale is one of the big advocates of a vegan diet. And so are many people within the permaculture movement. And there's two sides to this story. I think we need to ensure when we're talking about a plant-based diet that we put the word whole food in front of it. A whole food plant-based diet is absolutely what we need to be moving towards. A processed vegan diet can cause so many issues. So from my side of the fence, I have friends in the Amazon that are sending me horrific pictures of all this new deforestation. And I'm saying, hey, what's the driver? Taro. They're now cutting down all the forests for taro. And I said, well, look, find out where it's going. Where's it going? It's all coming into Europe and the USA. Why? Who do we know that eats taro? Nobody. And it took me some digging to find out. And it's being used in the plant-based diet. It's processed vegan food. We create a new driver and we don't know where it comes from. So I told Dale this, and I said, you know what, if you're going to promote the vegan market, can you please ensure that you start pushing not the processed foods, but the whole food diet? Yeah. He said to me, well, send me that research paper, which I did. And I haven't heard anything back from him. So I said, you know, we really need to talk about this, you know, and the same thing, you know, with the wind turbine blades. It's like, yeah, I told him too. It's just like, hey, dude, like there's some amazing stuff. Let's get moving on this. You know, what are we waiting for? We don't need to keep making the same that we've already done. So yeah, change is what is inevitable. More turnips, absolutely. Bio washing up liquid was one thing that led to palm oil going huge. Yeah, I think there's many drivers to the whole palm oil story. And interestingly, I am really keen to do some work with palm oil and get it out of being currently, obviously, it's a monoculture. But through using agroforestry systems, I'm about to do a whole load of trials of putting our alley cropping with palm oil in between. Because as much as we can all hate palm oil, there is no other oil that produces so much per tree. So the story is, if we don't have palm oil, we've got to use a lot more land to get the same amount of oil to grow as can grow on one palm oil tree. The issue with palm oil, obviously, is the deforestation, but there's so much land currently which is all abandoned cattle fields. So, that's what we need to be using. And that's what, so Rainforest Saver is the organization I work with. So please follow us. We need to actually get a social media profile. We're doing amazing stuff and really, really able to show an alternative to deforestation through agroforestry. So the next set of trials I'm going to do is going to be on palm oil, because it's not going away. So we've got to turn it around. And yeah.
Great. There's just one last question, which was, are there any biomimicry inspired products that we could support by buying?
Biomimicry products, I mean, well, there's that gecko tape, which is, a biomimicry inspired product. But yeah, not really that I know. There's some cool, if you're wanting to use it as an educational, there's the Ask Nature, have a pack of cards. And that's quite a good kind of like educational way of looking at kind of design questions and elements in nature which can help us with those design questions. So the Arts Nature cards are a good product to for that kind of conversation.
It's great. And I suppose it's a lot around this kind of the closed loop system. So actually, what can we reuse rather than buy new. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Nicola. That was just really inspiring, and what a wonderful way to spend a Wednesday evening in December, just feeling really, I feel so much more connected to nature as well. Thank you so much for that. I'll make sure this recording is shared afterwards. So I'll make sure it's shared via email, and it will also be added to our community hub in the Campfire space. Just one last thing to mention, that we've got a series of campfire events coming up in the new year. I'm just going to share my screen very quickly just so I can put it up. Here we go. So we have, in January, we've got Morag Gamble and Roland Ansima talking about a project that they have been working on in East African refugee settlements and the permaculture education that's being delivered within those communities. And that's going to be incredibly inspiring. That's on Wednesday, the 10th of January at 10 a.m. We've then got a session on forest gardening on the 7th of February, followed by a session with Katie Shepherd, who I can see is here tonight, on moving through climate grief to climate action. And then we've got a session with Samuel from Solhaven. He's going to be talking about how to take your dream, take your big dream and turn it into a reality, and using some of the learnings that he's come up with along the way on his journey. And then finally, we've got a session with Muzamal around decision making for small groups. So that's our program for the first half of the year. We are also in the process of designing a program for the second half of the year. If anybody has any suggestions, ideas, would like to volunteer to run a session, just get in touch. We are looking at topics which are relevant to both permaculture, the regenerative movement, and kind of all of those edge topics as well, but really looking to see how we can grow our knowledge and share within this community. And then finally, if you don't have access to the community hub, just get in touch with me and I can make sure that's all sorted. But yeah, we want to see everyone on there so we can share information about the event, so you can get your registration links and all the rest of it. So that's all for this evening. We've got a couple of minutes if people want to stay on just to have an informal discussion, or if they want to ask us anything about their membership, or they have any questions or suggestions. Myself and Andy will stay on for a few more minutes if anyone's got any questions first. Otherwise, I'll just say have a lovely rest of your evening, and thank you so much for coming along. It was really nice to see so many faces this evening.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Nicola.
Yay, thank you, everybody. there was one little thing in somebody's written in there about living labs at St John's University in York could be interested in a biomimicry module. So that'd be nice if something came from that like
Yeah,
that, which
that'd be
I
good.
can follow up with. But yeah, so my next Patreon
All right,
is with Morag. So
cool.
Just to say that I'm a York St John graduate, so I've got a foot in the door there, but I'm leading a session for students and for the local community there in January about why it makes sense to set up a permaculture cooperative, essentially. There's a group on campus that want to, so there's a cross-disciplinary research group that are trying to implement food systems change, and they're starting on campus but have a wider research scope. And there's a group of students that are really pushing to set up a catering cooperative, workers co-op for students. I'm a founding member of a workers co-op, so I'm going to run a practical workshop with their careers department for an hour and a half to help the student. Well, by the end of it, they're going to do it, basically. They like just get the forms in and get on with it. Come on.
Right.
So I'll introduce Catherine to you and your work, Nicola, and suggest they pay you to do some work with them.
that'll be good.
Fab.
Yeah, that's the thing. There's a lot of talk, as we've seen over these last few days. Lots of people are very good at talking, but very few people actually move from the talk into the action. So it's what we need right now is just, more people just stepping it up and just taking the next step in whatever way that is.
Indeed. Yeah.
Thank you, Ryan. That would be great.
Fantastic. Well, basically, we're here for any kind of membership questions, anything about how the association works, any ideas. Otherwise, we'll see you soon. Hi, Lisa. Hi, Katie. See you soon. Thanks for joining us, Montiello.
Thank you so much.
Okay. See you again. See you next time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. I'm going to stop the recording.